Have you ever wondered what existed before the great famous schools of Islamic law? It turns out there was a shared legal architecture, a kind of universal logic that everyone was using. It's this foundational system that really shaped centuries of legal thinking, and today, we're going to see exactly how it works. To do that, we have to start with a really fundamental question. How does a legal system actually think? Seriously, we're not just interested in what the final rules are, but the process itself, the logical machinery humming away under the hood to get to those conclusions. And this is probably the best way to picture it. You can think of the different schools of law, the Hanafis, Malikis, and so on, as apps on your phone. Each one has its own unique features, its own interface. But deep down, they're all running on the very same operating system. And that's what we're calling the Medinan Toolkit. So let's dive into this shared legal OS. I love this subtitle, the hardware before the software. This foundational logic was forged by the very first generation of Muslims, and it all came together in the city of Medina. This is the common ground where everything else was built. And this is the crucial point. Long before the different schools developed their own specialized methods, this universal logic was already there, already working. So in this explainer, what we're going to do is peel back those layers and look at the base code, the shared way of thinking that actually unites them all. Okay, so every operating system needs data, right? It needs something to process. So what's the core data for this legal system? Well, it all kicks off with 4 foundational inputs that all the major schools of thought completely agree on. 4. That's the number. All valid legal reasoning in this entire tradition has to start with these 4 non-negotiable authoritative inputs. They are the absolute undisputed starting line for any legal debate. So what are they? Well, first you have the Quran, which is seen as the script. Then you've got the Sunnah, the Prophet's tradition, which acts as the executive protocol. It shows you how to apply that script. After that comes ijma, or consensus, which keeps the system stable. And finally, qiyas, or analogy, which lets the system grow to handle new situations. Okay, so we've got our data. Now, how does the system actually process it all? It really comes down to 2 key mechanisms, something called a linguistic compiler and a really powerful engine of analogy. Let's start with the linguistic compiler. This part is so critical. Because the original texts are in Arabic, grammar isn't just about language, it literally functions as the system's core logic. You absolutely have to master these linguistic rules to be a jurist. It's non-negotiable. For example, one of the first things a jurist does is filter the text to figure out, okay, is this rule general, meaning it applies to everyone all the time, or is it specific and only applies to a particular case? Getting that distinction right is absolutely crucial. You can imagine the mistakes you'd make otherwise. But what about when something brand new comes up? A situation that's just not mentioned in the text at all? Well, this is where the system gets really dynamic. This is when jurists fire up what's known as the engine of analogy, or qiyas. And this isn't just some wild guess. It is a super rigorous 4-step process. You start with a root case that is in the text. Then you identify the new case you're dealing with. The key is to find the illah, the effective cause that connects them. And once you have that, you can extend the original ruling. It's incredibly systematic. Now, let's zoom in on that term, the illah, or effective cause. This is the absolute linchpin of the whole process. It's not just some vague similarity between 2 things. It has to be the precise, identifiable, almost measurable reason why the original ruling was made in the first place. It's the because. And this right here just sums up the whole engine perfectly. It's a simple but incredibly powerful rule. If that effective cause, that illah, is present in a new situation, then the ruling applies. If that cause isn't there, the ruling is suspended. It makes the law this living, dynamic thing, not something static and frozen. All right, so the system has its inputs and its processing engine, but any good OS also needs safeguards, right? You need firewalls and checks and balances to make sure the outputs are actually sound and don't end up causing harm. So let's look at those. The number 1 system integrity check is this. Any valid legal ruling that comes out of the system must protect 5 essential objectives. These are known as the maqasid. You can think of them as the core values that the entire legal system is programmed to preserve and defend. And here they are, the preservation of religion, of life, of the intellect, of lineage, and of wealth. Any ruling that fundamentally violates or destroys one of these is considered structurally unsound. It's basically a system error, a bug.
Okay, but what about really extreme circumstances? What if following the rule would actually cause a disaster? Well, the system has a built-in emergency override for exactly that. It's known as the logic of necessity, or darura.
The principle itself is incredibly straightforward, but also incredibly powerful. It says that necessity can temporarily make something that is normally forbidden permissible. It's a critical release valve built into the system for those moments of genuine, unavoidable hardship.
But, and this is a huge but, this is not a blank check. It's not a free-for-all. The permission that necessity gives you extends only to the absolute minimum degree required to get rid of the harm, not an inch more. It just goes to show you the system's precision, even in an emergency.
So, we've seen the inputs, the engine, and the safeguards. Let's kind of wrap this all up by talking about why this shared logic, this unifying anchor layer, matters so much.
The big takeaway here is that this Medana toolkit is the anchor. It is the common ground. It's what ensures that even with all the diversity and all the healthy debate that came later, there's a shared logic that unites the entire tradition of Islamic jurisprudence.
And this quote just captures it perfectly. The disagreements and the different methods that the later schools of law developed, they didn't just pop up out of nowhere. They actually grew out of this shared foundation, usually because different jurists were emphasizing different parts of the very same toolkit. And that leaves us with a pretty wild, thought-provoking question for today. As we're all trying to figure out how to build ethical frameworks for artificial intelligence, is it possible we could learn something from this ancient system? A system that's been thinking deeply about logic, about source data, and system overrides for well over 1,000 years. Could this be a key to teaching ethics to modern AI? Definitely something to think about.